Michigan, Romulus and Livonia. I think William J. Mays is a worthless cock. I think he's a spineless pussy. And I think that he is a fraudster. I think he's a shyster. And I cannot wait until nature takes its course and removes his fat, decrepit ass out of the gene pool. For good. Because he's a walking heart attack. And, all the cigarette smoking and the alcoholism, it will catch up to Mr. Mays. Definitely will. And I know you're not supposed to wish bad things on people, but there is a spot in hell for degenerates and for, con artists, because that's what William J. Mays is. William J. Mays is a con artist. And he, well, let's see. What did William J. Mays do, or what didn't he do? Well, he didn't want to schedule an evidentiary hearing. I'm just completely against that. And he also didn't want to talk about my case in front of Wayne County Circuit Court, right? Which is odd, being the only case ever, the only person ever charged with obstruction or certainly assault and battery on a police officer, and to not have it bound over to Circuit Court. That's quite something. That's quite something right there. But he wasn't interested, even though I had already paid for the hearing and I'd already scheduled it, but he went and just canceled it for me on my own behalf without ever even consulting me, of course. So you got to beg the question, well, why? Well, the only conclusion that I can make is that he was just trying to load the deck, so to speak, and he was trying to control the outcome. And I got the impression, just based off my experiences with him, my impression was that there was something more nefarious going on. And what I really thought was going on was basically he was trying to prolong the case as much as possible, because if you have an evidentiary hearing, well, that kind of eliminates the case in itself, right? Because you can get rid of 3 or 4 or even 5 of the charges, right? And then there's no need for a jury trial after that. Well, it was very abundantly clear that Mr. Mays just did not want to do that, even despite my plethora of requests, mine and my wife's requests. He, wouldn't do that, wouldn't have any communication between us, right? So the only communication, and I will say this for the record, the only communication that he had that with us was to say, oh, you got remanded. That was the only communication. He never had any communication that he initiated, right? So the communication was, if I initiated it, right, and I was a nuisance for him, right, well, then he would respond with, stop, basically. But as far as like him ever discussing any strategy, ever, running things by my wife and I, that never occurred, not one time. And there was just too many things about it that didn't add up. There was just too many things that just didn't seem right. When he goes into chambers with the prosecutor and the judge, it was abundantly obvious to anyone who was paying attention that something happened in those meetings. And let's just say it wasn't for my benefit. Let's just put it that way. And so I know that the judge and the prosecutor and him were all in on it. I know that because that's, the only logical conclusion that one could make, because you're like, okay, well, this is all fruit of the poisonous tree. There is no ordinance. So there isn't obstruction, right? There is no way to obstruct something that doesn't exist, that's not codified. So you go, okay, so then what do we have here? Well, we technically don't have anything because it's all void ab initio. It's all fruit of the poisonous tree. And so, okay, well, why are we still going not just to one jury trial now, but thanks to William J. Mays, we had to have another jury trial, right? We needed another jury trial, and I'm thinking, well, damn, one evidentiary hearing is definitely going to take care of at least 3 out of the 5 charges. Like, the 3 out of 5 charges couldn't even have happened, right? And my argument is, well, none of them could have happened, because had you not broke into my house and violated my 4th and my 14th Amendment rights, there would have been no future interactions that could have occurred, right? If you respected my property rights and actually argued it for the record, right? But see, William J. Mays wasn't interested in my property rights. He was only interested in money, surprise, surprise, he wanted to have 2 jury trials instead of 1, without ever explaining it to me. Well, why do we need 2? Why don't we just have a couple evidentiary hearings and see where it goes? Because I know for certain the first charge has to be dismissed because it's void for vagueness and it doesn't even exist. It's never codified into law. So that you can't obstruct with something that doesn't exist, right? So that seemed pretty simple. But then the obscene telecommunications as well, because that was a direct response to, somebody woefully violating the living fuck out of my rights. So definitely wasn't a true threat by any definition of the word. It was totally circumstantial. Stay off my property, there won't be no problems. Don't start nothing, there won't be nothing, right? You don't cross this side of the fence, we don't have any issue. That's the message. And he wasn't interested in, discussing that. He was just interested in, convoluting it and dragging it out and getting 20 grand out of it. That's what he wanted. He goes to court and argues to the judge that I'm indigent, right? That I'm completely broke, have no money. But then he's demanding $12,000 for 2 jury trials, right? And then he wants $2,000 for an evidentiary motion, right? Something that I could draft for him, and then I'll submit it on his behalf, right? No, they don't want to do that, right? They want to load the deck. They want to, they want to. This is how these people will operate. This is what I've learned. They get a number in their head, and that's what they want for this case, and that's that. And they're going to do anything and everything they can to ensure that they get that type of money, right? Because there was no legal argument to be made to not do an evidentiary hearing, right? There was no legal argument. Well, this was his logic, right? This was his logic when I confronted him about, hey, why'd you cancel my emergency bond revocation appeal hearing with the circuit court? I don't know what you call it, to go over the bonds and conditions, right? And then this guy, keep in mind, he's never apparently had any interactions with this judge, is what he's told me. But he's telling me it's a waste of time, complete waste of time. And I'm like, okay, so you just sat there and told me that I have the most punitive bond conditions one can have. Punitive pretrial bond conditions. And you don't want to discuss it with a higher... You've put on the record, on a motion, that this case should be in front of Wayne County Circuit Court. But you don't want to discuss it with a judge who could potentially alter or change the conditions, or who could find some improprieties, let's say, of the 29th District Court, the ROA not adding up, and all sorts of things, right? I had a judge on the record state, for the record, that an accurate ROA isn't necessary, right? That it's splitting hairs, right? That's what he argued on the record, that an ROA that's not accurate and that's incomplete, it's completely fine, like no big deal. Like that was argued on the record by a judge, which I told William J. Mays this. I said, you could have been a hero, but instead you're just a zero, right? But I believe, based on just his conduct, right, I believe the guy is a fucking raging alcoholic, right? A complete raging alcoholic. Just based off my experiences with him, I smell alcohol on his breath. I've been up and close to him. He stinks. And I've been in a few rehabs. I know, it takes one to know one, right? And so, yeah, in my personal opinion, he's a raging alcoholic. And he just, like, some of his logic was just, it was like demented level of function, right? It was like, well, just don't question me, do whatever I say. And I'm like, well, no, trust me, bro, is not a legal strategy, right? At least not for me. Maybe for some people that's good enough for them. Don't question it, right? But I'm going to question everything you tell me. I'm going to question everything that happens, and that's all I can do, right? That's how I work. That's how my brain works, is I ask questions and I demand answers. And when you started pressing them about, well, why are you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Mr. William J. Mays, he gets very defensive, and he lashed out against me several times. But that's what he does. That's his pattern, is like, if you question him, then he'll lash out, right? And then he'll go on the offensive and try to accuse you of what he's doing. He's really a narcissist, in my opinion, right? Now, obviously, who am I? I'm not a clinical psychologist, but some narcissistic traits, and he's a very bitter person. he's very vindictive. And when you confront him on his bullshit, he doubles down. Just like the city of Wayne. They're two peas in a pod, really. And so I see clearly why, in the transcript and the ROA and the record speaks for itself. We can clearly see why you didn't want this to be in front of a different court. We can clearly see why. Because, the court would ask, well, what the fuck are you doing? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Well, because William J. Mays, he just wanted some cash. That's my heartfelt opinion, right? And I'm allowed to have this opinion. And, I'm sure he'll try to, he's already done this once, right? He'll try to demand, he'll try to demand money out of you, right? He goes to court and argues you don't have any money, but then he's trying to, ask you for $12,000 for 2 jury trials. And you're like, well, there really shouldn't even be 1 jury trial. 3 or 4 out of 5 of these charges for sure are getting tossed, right? Just right out of the fucking gate. And despite that, no, not interested in evidentiary hearing, not at all. Went out of his way to not have one. Treated these bond conditions like they were legitimate or constitutional, for one, because and it's like fruit of the poisonous tree, right? The concept is like if the original initiation, right, was invalid, right, the original search, the original stop, the original break-in, right, of curtilage, right, if that was unlawful, everything that comes after it is unlawful as well. You can't use the evidence that you obtained illegally, right? And it makes the evidence inadmissible. Well, the same concept applies here, guys. If a bond condition is attached to a completely bullshit charge, completely fabricated out of thin air charge, well, that bond condition by extension is bullshit. And he'll say, well, that's the argument. No, that's the facts, right? Just because the judge decides he's not going to follow the law or doesn't care to, doesn't invalidate that law. It just means you got to go in front of a different judge, right? Which is what I tried to do several times, which William Mays actively obstructed it. And then, didn't even consult my wife. My wife's paying for my legal defense. And he has such little respect for my wife that he won't even keep her informed up to date on how he's spending her money, right? The guy's a joke. The guy's a total piece of shit. The guy's a total jack-off. The guy is all stash, no cattle. That's what I'm branding William Mays. That's the title of this video. All stash, no cattle, because that's what I saw. That's what I witnessed. That's what the incompetence that I had to endure, right? The incompetence that I had to witness, and then the consequences that I had to endure as a result of his incompetence was truly, it's unforgivable. Really, it is. He'll sit there and tell you, until he's blue in the fucking face. He's blue in the face anyway. His arteries are clogged. But he'll argue till he's blue in the face that he did everything he could, and he'll give you this great rah, he's doing something. He's a fighter for the common man. No, he's a piece of shit, guys. Just like every other attorney in this country, 95% of them are pieces of human garbage, straight up. And if you don't believe that, well, then I have a bridge to sell you in Idaho, because no, lawyers are the problem with this country. The reason this country is such an oppressive, shitty place to live, the majority of this country, the reason that is because of lawyers. That's why, right? I've never seen people fuck something up so simple than I have these lawyers that have been, in Wayne County, Michigan, of all places, right? You would think Wayne County would have some decent attorneys, being that it's the biggest, most populated county in the state of Michigan, but no, it's actually the opposite. It actually has the worst attorneys, and just people that they don't care about the truth, they don't care about justice, they don't care about the Constitution. No, they care about their pocketbook, and that's all the fuck they care about, and that's all William J. Mays cares about, in my opinion, right? Now, that's my opinion, and everybody has one, but I lived it. I lived his incompetence and his malevolence, and like I said, I don't believe he's just incompetent. I know he's incompetent. I've had to be the victim of his incompetence, but I believe there was more to it. I believe he's not the most ethical of people. I don't believe that for a second. I think the guy, like I said, is a piece of shit. And that's my opinion, and that's the facts. And I give him 1 out of 5 star, and I recommend you don't hire him. And I recommend you might as well just go public defender, right? Because you'll save a lot of money, and you'll probably get a better result. Because William J. Mays did absolutely nothing for my case, and my case was extremely winnable. But like I said, you know, when you don't do what you're told, when you want to be a servant to somebody, but then you don't want to serve them, I find that very interesting, right? He couldn't be bothered to bring me some documentation that I had requested within ample time, and which he promised he'd give to me before our last hearing. So I had to fire him, you know. The guy's he's worthless. He's fucking worthless. And I'm a disabled U.S. Army veteran. I served this country. I know the Constitution like I know my wife's tits, right? And yeah, needless to say, my constitutional rights were not upheld by William J. Mays. Not at all. Not at all. And he actively, in my opinion, his inactions kept me in jail, kept me oppressed longer, and, you know, did nothing other than just waste my money. Is all it did. That's all that it did. It was just a complete waste of money. So that's my opinion on the matter. Like I said, I recommend that you seek somebody else. Seek someone who's you know, doesn't show up to court. I don't know what the word would be, right? But needless to say, I wasn't the only one who thought that the guy was out of his fucking mind. And you know, some people are just naturally high. I don't know. Some people just have that aura. But no, I wasn't impressed. I wasn't impressed one bit by it. Like I said, I thought he was a loudmouth buffoon, and he did nothing other than piss the judge off and failed to hold the judge's feet to the fire. You know, and then once he got called into chambers, he cucked out like a good little boy, and he did what he was told. So instead of upholding his client's rights, he decided to do whatever the judge told him to do. And you know, I think that's too damn bad. But you know, could have been a hero, but instead he's a zero. And don't hire him. If you do, well, best of luck to you. Best of luck to you. But I don't recommend, in good conscience, as someone who's served this country, because William Mays never served a day in the military. So as far as, in my personal opinion, if you've never served in the military, shut the fuck up. You don't even have a right. Not to say you don't have a right to speak, but your opinion should be subservient to those who have served. Now, obviously, there's no length on it, and you know, there's always exceptions to the rule. But in general, if you haven't served in the military, shut the fuck up about, you know, what freedom is and the cost of it. And, you know, the average person is so detached from reality that it's fucking sickening, and that includes attorneys, right? The quality of people in this country has regressed so much in the last 20 years. It's truly just, it's a social phenomenon. It's fucking completely and utterly insane that, no, I didn't say you're not an American. I'm just saying, you know, you'll notice that the people that are so eager to take away rights are people that didn't serve in the military. The people that are so willing, you know, casually, like William J. Mays and other people, they're so casually willing to be complicit in the taking of somebody's rights, you know, because they can profit from it, right? And part of the reason why people act this way is because they never served in the military. They don't know what it's like, and they don't know the cost of freedom. They don't know the true price of it. And, you know, they're sheltered, right? And they'll try to talk to you about the Constitution and what it means. And, you know, it's frustrating as somebody who, you know, and I'm not, you know, Billy Badass, you know, Rambo or nothing. I'm not John Rambo, but, you know, my experiences have been rather traumatic in the military. But my experiences in the city of Wayne and just dealing with their malevolence and their vindictiveness and their maliciousness, and then dealing with these just these plethora of incompetent attorneys, incompetent or maliciously incompetent, one or the two, or both, right? And yeah, just the quality of people in this country has just went to shit, has went to absolute dog shit, and that's across all. You know, you used to think that certain professions were off limits, certain professions were better than others, but it's just the quality of the average American. The quality of the average American nowadays. I hate to say it, dude, but it's fucking. It makes me want to move to Argentina, right? Why should I be wanting to move to a third world country, and leave the country in which I fought to serve? Why would the country I've given so much for, in and outside a uniform, right? And I have to contemplate, right? Seriously contemplate, man, I better go to South America. I better go to South America so my family is safe, so I don't have to worry about being kidnapped and thrown into a dungeon again. Yeah, I mean, it's really shocking that, you know, I even have to have these thoughts, these valid, credible, practical thoughts of like, man, I got to get the fuck out of here. Yeah, but don't be a hypocrite, brother. Just because I didn't serve doesn't mean that I'm not an American. No, I mean, being let me clarify something. Being in service is not about wearing a fucking uniform, right? It's not about being in a formation or being in a parade. It's not about any of that bullshit, right? Service is something that you just do at any given time whenever you can, and you're happy to do it. You know, that's service, right? You're not getting paid for it. There's not some fucking huge pot of gold at the end of the rainbow and this and that. It's like, no, your service is about doing good for your fellow countrymen. And so just by you subscribing to this channel, you're clearly above the rest, right? You're clearly a sub above, right, as Jersey Mike's calls it. And I thank you for that, you know, because you recognize, at least I hope you do, that, you know, the Constitution is a very fragile thing, and it must be upheld and it must be protected. And I think you guys realize that I'm doing this for the betterment of humanity, that I'm doing this for the betterment of society, that people hear this message, right? That some person might hear it and do more research, right? And not make a rash decision to hire a jackass who's only interested in, you know, just running up the tab, let's be honest. And that's my opinion. That's my opinion. Can I go to court and legally prove it beyond any reasonable doubt? I don't know, maybe not, probably not, who knows. But I don't need to, right? I don't need to, you know, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, I don't need to go to a jury and prove that it's a duck. I can, you know, we can just use deductive reasoning and a little bit of common sense and a little bit of logic and maybe a touch of imagination, but really you don't got to imagine very far. You really don't. You know, when your wife, who doesn't even speak English, is telling you in another language that you're getting fucked over, well, let's just say I'm gonna take the opinion of my wife seriously, you know, and then when she's thoroughly explaining it to me better than a lawyer, better than any lawyer has in this case, she's explaining the errors of what's going on. I mean, hey, but my wife is an attorney in another country. She does practice family law in the Dominican Republic, so she knows a thing or two. But I don't think you don't need a law degree to know right from wrong and common sense. It's just, like I said, everything in America has got to be a transaction now. Everything in America has got to, you know, be a number, and you know, we're in the so-called the most efficient times ever. And no, it's just the scummery has just amplified in this country tenfold. And the legal profession is obviously the worst of them. I mean, I used to believe naively, like, oh, lawyers are people too, and some lawyers are better than others, and I guess that's true, right? Lawyers are technically people, and some of them do good work for sure, but the vast majority, no. I no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Nope, it just comes down to money. That's all it comes down to. It just comes down to money. And if you're not willing to pay enough money, or if you're not the right demographic, or they have too big of a caseload, or there's a million reasons. Why don't you want to have an evidentiary hearing? Why aren't you filing a motion to suppress evidence? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Well, because it's not as cost effective, right? They make more money. William J. Mays would make more money by having 2 jury trials, right, instead of 1 jury trial. Obviously, that it doesn't take a mathematician to see that. But yeah, filing evidentiary hearings that a corrupt judge might just throw out anyways, I mean, it's not cost effective. And then it's kind of like you're working yourself out of a job, right? If you file a couple evidentiary hearings and motions, rather, and a motion to suppress, and maybe a couple other motions, and some of them are granted, well, then that eliminates some of the charges, which eliminates some of the case, which eliminates some of the work, right? And then it's deductive reasoning. It's not overtly complex shit here. It's pretty simple shit. And that's the reason why William Mays is lashing out so much in his review responses, right? Well, it's because he knows, like, I hit a nerve and I'm on to something, and I'm flying too close to the sun, right? That's a common theme in my life. When I fly too close to the sun, people try to burn me, but they don't realize I'm cold as ice. I don't get burnt. And I really, like I said, some things are bigger than your life. Some things are bigger than your family's life. Some things are bigger than the country's life. Some things are so big. And the truth for me is one of them. Biblically speaking, the truth is the thing that I regard the most for. Not to say I don't love my family, I don't love myself. I do. But those are temporary things. And at least, in this life. And if you don't have truth, then you don't have freedom. And if you don't have freedom, well, then you can't have peace, right? So for me, I've always sought out the truth, and I've always put that as my highest regard, because that's what Jesus, and that's what any biblical person, anyone who has any modicum of integrity will tell you. The truth is all that matters, right? And if you don't have the truth, then you don't have anything. So that's why we continue to do what we do. And if I misspeak, or say something that's not thoroughly thought out, you're free to hold me to it. You're free to hold me to the fire, but I'm also free to be wrong and get corrected. But yeah, I gotta go. We got a scene to investigate.